My husband served me divorce papers, demanding my house, my business, and my savings, but explicitly rejected custody of our 5-year-old son. So I legally and financially destroyed his entire existence. If you had told me a year ago that the man I had built my entire life around would look me dead in the eye and say he wanted nothing to do with our 5-year-old son, I would have called you insane. But life has a funny way of ripping off the blinders when you least expect it. My husband of 8 years didn't just want to leave me, he wanted to ruin me. He demanded our custom-built house, 50% of the marketing firm I built from the ground up, all our joint investments, and my retirement fund. The only thing he specifically, ruthlessly opted out of, our little boy. He wanted 0 custody, 0 visitation, and 0 parental responsibility. He wanted to wipe his hands clean of the family we made and walk away with a mountain of my cash. Well, spoiler alert, I didn't just stop him. I made sure he walked away with absolutely nothing, not even his freedom. Let me back up so this all makes sense. My name is Sarah, 32F, and my now ex-husband, who we will call David, 35M, used to be the quintessential charming, devoted partner. We met when I was 22 and fresh out of college. I was ambitious, driven, and working 80-hour weeks trying to get my boutique digital marketing agency off the ground. David was working in corporate finance. He was stable, handsome, and seemed completely in awe of my drive. For the first few years of our relationship, he was my biggest cheerleader. When my business started pulling in 6 figures, we celebrated with cheap champagne on the floor of our tiny apartment. When it crossed the 7-figure mark a few years later, we bought our dream home in the suburbs of Chicago. Life felt perfect. We got married in a beautiful ceremony in Napa Valley. 2 years later, we welcomed our son, Leo. When Leo was born, I thought our family was complete. David seemed like a doting father at first. He was there for the late-night feedings, the first steps, and the babbling milestones. But as Leo grew from a sleeping newborn into an energetic, demanding toddler, David's enthusiasm began to wane. I didn't notice it immediately because I was drowning in the sheer exhaustion of being a working mother. I was balancing a multi-million-dollar agency with preschool drop-offs, while David's career in finance seemed to plateau. He was passed over for a major promotion at his firm, and looking back, that was the catalyst for the monster he eventually became. He started working longer hours, taking more business trips, and growing increasingly short-tempered with both me and Leo. By the time Leo was 4, David was essentially a ghost in his own house. If he was home, he was locked in his home office, aggressively typing on his laptop or taking hushed phone calls. Whenever I asked him to spend time with Leo, to take him to the park, or just play Legos with him, David always had an excuse. I'm stressed, Sarah. I'm carrying the mental load of my team right now. I just need peace and quiet. He started making snide comments about my success. If I bought a new car or treated us to a vacation, he would say things like, "Must be nice to have a job where you just play on social media all day and make millions while real men do actual work." I ignored the red flags. I rationalized his behavior, convincing myself that he was just going through a midlife crisis or dealing with depression. I suggested marriage counseling. He laughed in my face and told me that therapy was for weak people who couldn't handle their own problems. Then came the financial discrepancies. Because of my business, we had a very comfortable lifestyle. We had a joint account for household expenses and our mortgage, but we maintained separate personal accounts. One evening, I was doing our taxes with my CPA and noticed that large chunks of money, thousands of dollars a month, were disappearing from our joint savings account. When I confronted David about it, he gaslit me into oblivion. He claimed he was investing in high-yield crypto portfolios to secure our future. When I asked to see the portfolios, he exploded. He called me controlling, paranoid, and accused me of financial abuse just because I made more money than him. To keep the peace, I backed off. That was my biggest mistake. But it also became the very thing that fueled my ultimate revenge. Tipping point happened on Leo's 5th birthday. I had spent weeks planning a huge dinosaur-themed party for him. I rented out a local indoor playground, ordered a custom 3-tier T-Rex cake, and invited 20 of his little friends and their parents. David had promised, swore on his life, that he would take the day off to be there. The party started at 2 p.m. By 3:30, David was nowhere to be found. He wasn't answering his texts. His phone went straight to voicemail. I spent the entire party pasting on a fake, bright smile for the other parents while watching my little boy continuously look at the door, waiting for his daddy. It broke my heart into a million pieces. When we finally got home around 6 p.m., Leo was exhausted and crying because his dad had missed his birthday. I tucked him into bed, read him a story, and went downstairs to wait for David. I was ready to unleash hell. At 8 p.m., the front door finally unlocked. But David didn't walk in alone. He walked in with a man in a cheap gray suit. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Leo. "Do you have any idea what you just did to your son?" David didn't even flinch. He didn't look guilty. He looked cold, calculated, and terrifyingly calm. He looked at the man next to him and nodded. The man stepped forward and handed me a thick manila envelope. "Sarah, "Consider yourself served," the man said before turning around and walking out the door. I stood there, frozen, staring at the envelope. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. My husband was divorcing me. "What is this?" I whispered, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. "I'm done, Sarah," David said, crossing his arms and leaning against the entryway wall like we were discussing the weather. "I am sick of this life. I'm sick of being overshadowed by you. I'm sick of playing house." I forced my eyes down to the legal jargon on the pages. As I read his demands, my shock morphed into pure, unadulterated nausea. David was demanding everything. He wanted 50% of the current valuation of my marketing agency, which was currently valued at around $4 million. He wanted our $1.2 million house. He wanted the 2 luxury cars. He wanted me to pay him spousal support alimony because, apparently, he had quietly quit his finance job 3 weeks prior without telling me, legally making him unemployed at the time of filing. But then I reached the section regarding child custody. Petitioner David requests 0 physical or legal custody of the minor child Leo. Petitioner agrees to terminate parental rights to avoid future child support obligations. I stopped breathing. I read it again and again. I looked up at the man I had slept next to for 8 years. "You don't want custody? You want to terminate your rights to your own son?" My voice cracked. David rolled his eyes, a look of profound annoyance crossing his face. "Let's be real, Sarah. You're obsessed with being supermom. You keep him. I never wanted to be a father anyway. I only agreed to have a kid because you wouldn't shut up about it. I'm starting fresh. I want my half of the assets, the alimony to maintain the lifestyle I've grown accustomed to, and I'm out. Don't make this messy, or my lawyers will bleed you dry." He went upstairs, packed 2 large suitcases, and walked out the front door. He didn't even peek into Leo's room to say goodbye. I fell to my knees in the hallway and sobbed until I threw up. The betrayal was so profound, it physically hurt. The man I loved had essentially admitted our entire life was a farce. But as I sat on the cold hardwood floor, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my sleeping son upstairs, the grief suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a rage so intense, so white-hot, that I felt like I was vibrating. He didn't just break my heart. He discarded our child like trash. And for that, I was going to bury him. The very next morning, I didn't go to work. I drove to the most ruthless, highly rated family law attorney in the city. Her name was Diane, and she was a terrifyingly brilliant woman in her 50s who looked like she ate opposing counsel for breakfast. I sat in her plush leather chair, slammed the divorce papers on her desk, and told her the whole story. Diane read over the papers and scoffed. "He wants half your business, the house, alimony, and no child support? Your husband is an idiot, sweetheart. But we aren't just going to fight this. We are going to go on the offensive." We immediately hired a private investigator and a forensic accountant. I needed to know exactly what David had been doing with the thousands of dollars he drained from our joint accounts, and I needed to know what he was doing on his business trips. It only took the PI 4 days to crack David's life wide open. When Diane called me back into her office to review the findings, I actually had to laugh at the sheer cliche of it all. David was having an affair, but it wasn't just a casual fling. He had been seeing a 23-year-old Instagram model named Chloe for nearly 2 years. Chloe lived in an upscale apartment downtown. Guess who was paying her rent? David. Guess what account the money was coming from? Our joint savings. But it got worse. The forensic accountant found out that David hadn't just quit his job 3 weeks ago. He had been fired 6 months ago for gross incompetence and violating company policy. He had been pretending to go to work every single day. Instead, he was going to Chloe's apartment. To fund his illusion of being a wealthy, successful finance bro to his young mistress, he had been systematically siphoning funds from my accounts, taking out massive credit cards in my name, and forging my signature on documents to liquidate some of our smaller mutual funds. He had stolen nearly $200,000 from me in 6 months to buy Chloe designer bags, international vacations, and a leased Porsche. "This isn't just grounds for an at-fault divorce," Diane said, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is felony fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. He filed for divorce, thinking he was playing 3D chess, but he just handed us the gun to shoot him with." Diane gave me strict instructions. Play the victim. Let him think he has the upper hand. So I did. I put on the performance of a lifetime. Whenever David's lawyers reached out, Diane played the role of a desperate, panicked attorney trying to save her devastated client. I texted David occasionally, all under Diane's supervision, to create a paper trail, begging him to reconsider, crying about how much Leo missed him. David ate it up. His ego was so massive, he couldn't see the trap closing around him. He texted back awful, gloating messages. "You should have respected me more when I was there. Now you have to pay the price. Have your lawyers draw up the settlement. I want my money by the end of the month." He even moved Chloe into our house while I was visiting my parents for the weekend with Leo. My neighbor caught them on her Ring camera and sent me the footage. I didn't say a word. I just added it to the growing mountain of evidence. While David was busy playing sugar daddy and counting the imaginary millions he thought he was going to extract from my business, my legal team was quietly freezing his assets. We compiled bank statements, forged signatures, credit card logs, and IP addresses. We also found out a beautiful piece of information. The prenup we had signed, which David insisted on before we got married, because he thought he was going to be the breadwinner, had a very specific infidelity clause that he clearly hadn't read in years. Furthermore, my business wasn't technically just mine. 2 years prior, under the advice of my CPA, I had restructured my company under a complex, irrevocable trust in my son Leo's name to protect it from tax liabilities. Legally, I was an employee of the trust. I didn't own the company outright anymore. Leo did. And since David was actively fighting to terminate his parental rights to Leo, he had zero legal claim to a single dime of that company. The trap was fully set. It was time to pull the trigger. 3 months after he served me the papers, we sat down for mandatory mediation. The conference room was cold, sterile, and tense. I sat on one side of the massive mahogany table with Diane. David sat across from us with his lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Richard. David looked incredibly smug. He was wearing a brand new Rolex bought with my money and had this disgusting half smile on his face, like a cat who had just caught a mouse. "All right," Richard started, adjusting his tie. "My client is willing to be generous. If Sarah agrees to sign over the deed to the house today and agrees to a lump sum payment of $2 million for his half of the business, he will walk away quietly and formally sign away his parental rights to the child. No alimony required. It's a clean break." Diane didn't speak right away. She slowly opened her thick briefcase, pulled out a massive stack of manila folders, and dropped them on the table with a loud thud. "Generous," Diane said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's a fascinating word choice. We have a counteroffer." David rolled his eyes. "I'm not negotiating, Sarah. Pay up or I'll drag you through court for years." Diane ignored him and slid the first folder across the table to Richard. "Exhibit A," Diane said calmly. "Your client is claiming he is entitled to half of my client's business. Unfortunately, my client doesn't own the business. It is owned by the Leo Trust, a trust set up exclusively for the benefit of their son. The same son your client is currently trying to legally disown. According to the state laws of Illinois, David has zero legal standing to claim assets from a minor's irrevocable trust." Richard looked at the document, his face immediately draining of color. He looked at David. "Did you know about this?" David frowned. "What? No, that's BS. She makes the money. It's half mine." "Oh, but wait, there's more." Diane smiled, sliding the second folder over. Exhibit B, the prenuptial agreement. Specifically, Clause 14, Section B, which states that in the event of documented infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to spousal support and marital real estate. Since my client brought the home into the marriage, and your client has been having a documented affair for 22 months with a Miss Chloe Jenkins, he gets nothing. "You're spying on me?" David shouted, half standing up from his chair. "Sit down, David," Richard hissed, frantically reading the papers. "And finally, Exhibit C," Diane said, her voice turning to pure ice. She slid over the thickest folder. "Bank logs, credit card statements, and forensic accounting reports proving that your client forged my client's signature on legal financial documents, committed identity theft, and embezzled over $214,000 from marital accounts to fund his mistress's lifestyle. Furthermore, we have proof he was fired from his job for cause 6 months ago, rendering his claim of quitting null and void." The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Richard, David's lawyer, was physically sweating. He closed the folders, took off his glasses, and rubbed his temples. "David," Richard said quietly. "Is this true? She's twisting things! I was gonna put the money back!" David stammered, all the smugness completely wiped from his face. He looked like a cornered rat. Diane leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "Here is our counteroffer. David walks away with nothing. No house, no cars, no business, no money. He assumes 100% of the debt he fraudulently acquired in my client's name. He signs away his parental rights to Leo, just as he originally wanted. In exchange, we don't take these folders to the district attorney and press federal charges for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. You have 3 minutes to decide. Watching a narcissist realize they have been utterly defeated is an experience I wish I could bottle and sell." David completely lost his mind. He started screaming, crying, and pleading. He begged me to think of the good times. He told me he loved me, that Chloe meant nothing, that he was just lost and depressed. I looked him dead in the eye and said the only words I had spoken the entire meeting. "You didn't show up for Leo's birthday. You didn't even want your son. Sign the papers, David, because if you don't, I will personally make sure you rot in a 6x8 cell." His lawyer literally forced the pen into his hand. Richard knew that if this went to court, David would not only lose, but he would go to prison, and Richard wouldn't get paid a dime. David signed everything. With shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, he signed away the house, the money, and his son. But if you think that was the end of his karma, you underestimate my pettiness. As soon as the ink was dry and the divorce was finalized by a judge a week later, I realized I never actually signed an NDA regarding the evidence we collected. I was legally free to do whatever I wanted with the information. So, I packaged up all the evidence of his fraud, the stolen funds, and the fake credit cards, and anonymously mailed it to his former employer, the one he embezzled from before he was fired. Turns out, they were already investigating him for missing funds, and my care package was the final nail in the coffin. A month later, David was formally indicted for corporate embezzlement. When Chloe, his 23-year-old mistress, realized David was suddenly broke, facing criminal charges, and living out of a cheap motel because he had nowhere else to go, she dumped him via text message. She didn't even let him into her apartment, the one I had technically been paying for to get his clothes. She just threw his stuff out onto the sidewalk in garbage bags. It has been 2 years since that fateful day on Leo's birthday. David is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility for fraud. He has absolutely nothing. He destroyed his career, his reputation, his finances, and his freedom. All for a fleeting ego boost and a girl who left him the second the money dried up. As for me, I am thriving. My business is doing better than ever, bringing in double what it did when I was married. I sold the big empty house in the suburbs and bought a beautiful, cozy home closer to the city, right next to the best school district for Leo. Leo is 7 now. He is the happiest, smartest, most incredible little boy in the world. He has a mother who fiercely protects him, loves him, and will never let anyone make him feel like an inconvenience. He doesn't ask about his dad anymore. To him, our family is whole just the way it is. I learned a very valuable lesson through all of this. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. But more importantly, if someone tries to burn your life to the ground and leave your child in the ashes, don't just stand there and cry. Grab a hose, put out the fire, and use the leftover gasoline to burn their entire empire to the ground.